Thank you, David, and the team at Tenbound. My name's Hilmon Sorey. I'm the co-founder of CoachCRM. I'm really happy to be here. I appreciate the invitation. I've got a ton of respect for the amount of impact that's being delivered in these sessions. And so I'm here to talk about tactical coaching for massive impact. Let's see if we can pull that off. So first thought here, I want to go back in the Wayback Machine for a minute. This is Hilmon at 20 years old when I had a much larger head and a fairly skinny body. I was working as a frontline manager. It was my first frontline manager job at a SaaS company, web security. I had 12 SDRs working for me. I had been promoted because I was the top SDR. And this may be familiar to you. I had gotten into the role. I got a nice kind of pat on the back, and I was shown I actually had a little office, got a new login, and that was about it. There was no management training, no training on coaching for sure, no training really on mentorship, no training on training. It was just kind of like, you've done the job, so come on in here and do what you did with this team. And so I attempted to do that, right? I hopped into the CRM. I'm looking at conversion. I'm looking at data. I'm trying to figure out our sources. I'm, trying to manage the team and hold them accountable to activity metrics and things like this. And I did a fairly decent job of it. I'd worked on some outbound templates, email, multi-channel stuff, as well as calling templates. And I'd been a little beast on the phone. So that was something that I kind of held dear. And so I was working with folks on getting them the right language to use and all of these sorts of things. And I did fairly well. I'll tell you where I fell short. The numbers weren't always where they needed to be, but the bigger issue was people kept leaving. And what I was thinking partly was that, wow, I've got just a terrible management structure here. I can't keep people. But what was really happening was folks were going for better opportunities, right? They were finding that they weren't growing under my leadership. And I found that out the hard way. I came into the office one day, walked in off the elevator, and it's probably not great news when your boss grabs you, puts the arm around you as you get off the elevator and kind of ushers you into their office. Well, that's what my boss, Art, did. And he sat me down. I'll never forget this conversation. He said, hey, you're a great salesperson. Your heart's in the right place. Your team really likes working with you. But the biggest challenge here is, Hilmon, that they're not growing. And if they're not growing, we can't keep people. And if we're not able to promote people from SDR to AE and beyond, then we're in a bad situation where we're out there trying to recruit people into closing roles. And, the whole organization is not sustainable. So I was ushered the door. And in that moment, I set in my head to try to more deeply understand how you can go about keeping a team engaged from both motivation, how you can close the gap on performance, how you can become the type of manager that folks actually want to work with, and the type of manager that actually helps people to move in a steady progression throughout their career. So I've spent a lot of energy in that. The CoachCRM, the company I founded with Corey Bray, is all geared around how you go about making managers heroes. And when I say heroes, I look at heroism as being able to go in and help somebody to achieve their goals, help an organization to drive its goals, and to do this consistently in a way that's highly impactful. So that was then. And I came across some real clear paths and strategies. And what I want to do is I want to talk to you a little bit about what those paths are. And what I invite you to do is to join me in this journey. So I don't want to just deliver something to you. I know you're busy. If you've joined this webinar, whether you're doing it live or if you're doing it later, then you've got 1,000 things you could be doing. So one of the top C's of time management is to combine activities. So let's combine activities. If you want to join me here, think of a rep. Think of a rep that is on your team that you'd like to have a conversation with about their performance, and a coaching conversation that's going to move them forward. And then you're going to play along with me here, and we're going to talk about a clear 5-step model that allows you to do this really impactfully. I've rolled this out through my other company, ClozeLoop, for over maybe 1,000, 1,100 managers at this point who are having tremendous success in companies just like yours. So here's the criteria for who you're going to pick to coach in your head. Don't pick your problem child. What I mean by that is don't pick the person who's kind of on the fringe. Don't pick the person who you may have just put on a performance improvement plan. Pick somebody who has demonstrated potential. Pick somebody who you know has a clear opportunity for impact that you just want to get in there, roll up the sleeves, and make it work with. The reason you're not picking your problem child is because they may not be there later. We invest our coaching energy in the folks who have the greatest opportunity, the greatest evidenced opportunity for game. So this could be somebody who maybe they're not making enough calls, maybe they're not asking pain questions, maybe they're not being human on the phone. Believe it or not, I've heard that a lot, that get people who kind of get into this robot voice where it's like, hey, I'm Hilmon, I'm in my sales role right now, and it's really disjointed and obviously doesn't create rapport and doesn't create an impactful conversation. Some folks aren't listening. Figure out what it is. Take a second right now. Think about that individual. Think about the challenge. You probably got it really clear. The thing that's most important for you to consider right now is where they are today and where they need to be, the goal of where they need to be, because that's where coaching happens, is right there in that gap. All right, you got that person. For me, I'm going to go with Becca. Here's the challenge with Becca. Number one, we're calling in at the C-level, right? And her challenge is she doesn't really pull off the executive presence very well. She's very quick to kind of subjugate herself in the conversation, and folks walk all over her, whether it's the amount of time she's asking for, whether it's just trying to get to an actual conversation. People are just kind of yada-yadaing all over her, and she's not getting a fair chance at bat, though I know she can do it because she's really smart. Second thing I've noticed is she's always pitching instead of asking for pain. She goes on this big feature benefit dump of how we're swifter, faster, stronger, better, and people just kind of tune that out. You know, we all know pain is the way we go about creating commitment and urgency in a sales process. She's not getting it, even though we've talked about it before. Another problem, her meetings aren't holding. Now, some of these are probably interwoven, you're thinking to yourself. We'll get to that in just a second. Meetings aren't holding, and so she puts points on the board, and then they come right off because AE says, hey, person didn't show for the meeting. I've listened to a couple of her calls, and it sounds as though she's missing key things that our ICP is stating and that we should be looking for. These are problems that we solve. She's missing out on those. She's kind of tone deaf to some of the things that people are saying. I suspect it's because she's trying so hard to book meetings. And then lastly, you know, when I hop into CRM, not seeing notes that are really helpful for an account executive. And because of that, AEs kind of push back a little bit when they throw an opportunity over the fence. When Becca throws an opportunity over the fence, they push back a little bit, or they get in a conversation and they're ill-equipped. So I got a lot of things I could look at here with Becca, right? Let's talk about how we get into this. The biggest key for us, because we don't have a ton of time, and because Becca's got a lot of things going on and she's got a job to do, I don't want to try to throw 10 baseballs at her, 10 tennis balls at her and expect her to catch them all. That's not going to work. My job as I begin coaching is to first identify the challenge. So I'm going to choose one of these things that we just talked about. I invite you to do the same thing with the rep that you're thinking of, right? Choose one thing. Let's start there. And that one thing should have the least amount of friction, meaning I don't have to pull the whole team off and have a giant SKO and invite a trainer in to dive deep on this thing. No, this is something someone's been trained on before. I can hold them accountable to. I can help them exercise that muscle because it's something that should be within their grasp. That's what we're looking for, that least friction with the highest impact. And then I got to be able to clearly articulate what it is. There's nothing worse than pulling someone off the sales floor, figurative sales floor if you're in a distributed environment, hybrid environment, or you're working remotely, but you get the point. Pulling someone into a conversation with you and then kind of doing this really vague, like, so what do you think's going on in your calls? What are you hearing? What are some things you think we could, and it's just kind of like, well, where the heck are you going with this? What is the point? I got to be able to give Becca something tangible that she can hold on to, something that's got evidence, right? So here's what I'm picking. I'm going to pick this concept of her not uncovering pain. I'm going to tell you why. Of the things that I talked about before that are being impacted, the fact that calls aren't holding, even the fact that she's not getting good notes in there, the fact that she's not listening, the fact of executive presence, the one thing I think that is within her grasp to control that could have a significant impact on all of those things is if she understood and was able to articulate and ask our pain questions in her conversations. If she just did that top of funnel, I'll tell you what, if the pain is correct and it's landing with the C-level individual, they're going to give her her time. If the pain is something that she's accustomed to asking frequently, she's going to have an easier job of note taking, and that's going to correlate into AEs accepting her opportunities when they go into discovery, right? If it's an issue of listening, if she knows the pain she's looking for, she's going to start training her ear to hear the same things over and over, so it's going to make her conversations better. So that's what we're going to coach Becca on today. What's yours? Think about it really quickly. Make a note if you want to. Let's move on to the next one. That was challenge, right? Let's go on to outlining the path of success. Now, this is going to happen in advance of your actual conversation with a rep. This is where managers, we've got to spend some time doing some work to understand how we're actually going to manage this conversation. Too many times, I've done this back when I was a manager years ago, frontline first-time manager. I did this all the time. I would try to kind of arrive at the conclusion together in the meeting, because you know what? I'm busy. I'm pulled into meetings all day long. I've got folks asking me for things all day long. I got reports I got to generate. I am on the hook. And so my coaching conversations are kind of just this mutual kind of amoeba of a discussion. Not good. Take the time up front before you actually engage your rep to figure out what is the path to success. Now, here's the importance of this. The onus is on you as a manager, the person who has more experience, the person who has more expertise, which is why you have this role, to know how you're going to get that person from point A to point B, or from point B to point A. Somebody said, isn't A where you want to go? When I mentioned that once. So at any rate, to get them from where they are today to where they should be, to close that gap, you're the one who knows. If they knew, they'd probably be doing it. Right? If they knew, and if they already know, then you're the person who needs to architect how they're going to get there. You want to get this in your head so that you go into the conversation with some clarity. That's not to say that you're going to prescribe it, but let's think about it in advance. What is success going to look like? What I like to do is I reverse engineer. I say, if I'm listening to all of Becca's calls at a certain point in time, and I'm hearing pain questions asked all the time, what's happened before that? Well, what's happened before that is she's probably done some role play internally with some folks to get really good at asking those questions. Prior to doing that, she's probably got to understand what those questions are. And even though we did that in training about 6 or 8 weeks ago, I want to make sure she's got them handy. I want to make sure they're within her workflow, and I want to make sure they're within her control and that she understands why we're asking them. All of this stuff needs to be inside of her control. So what's my path going to be? I'm going to review pain questions. I'm going to role play with her. I'm going to ask her to apply 3 pain questions to each call that she makes. And I'm going to ask her to send recordings. Now, this is what I have in my head. Now, the interesting thing is, if I understand this path already, when I actually go to engage the rep, it's almost like if you've got children. If you don't, you've probably been a child before. It's almost like if a parent goes to a child and says something along the lines of, you know, Johnny, so what do you think we should do about the fact that in the middle of the night you came out here and made a pizza? Yeah, that's actually a fact that happened in my household. At any rate, what do you think we should do? Now, parent could come back and say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do the other, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? You leave it to the individual who's the culprit, not to call a rep a culprit, but like you leave it to the individual who's responsible. Let's go with that. They might come up with something that is not just more impactful, but is not something you have to manage. This is what's key. Too often, we as sales managers put the burden on ourselves. This is why we don't have coaching conversations. Because it's like, wow, do I really want to go have another conversation with Becca that's going to put more homework on my plate? I got enough to do this weekend. I'm just going to let that one slide. I'm going to punt that meeting, right? We do this all the time because we are taking on the responsibility, because we haven't got clarity around how we're going to delegate and hold someone accountable to their own success. So we're going to talk about that next. We got to go into this idea of co-creating an action plan. Now, the first 2 things, the identification of the challenge, outlining the path to success, this has taken place before you've had a conversation with your rep. So you've got that information written down. If you've done it right now, you're already armed for bear. And these last 3 things that you've got to accomplish, you can go do the moment you get off of this webinar. Okay? So co-creating the action plan, this is what that looks like. If you've heard of SMART goals before, that's specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time sensitive. I know sometimes people make that acronym variable. You can Google it. If you aren't familiar with SMART goals, you might like MET goals. This is the one I like because it's actually even a little bit shorter, right? They need to be measurable. The person needs to be empowered to do it, and it needs to be time sensitive. Just that simple. If you use KPIs, if you use any of the acronyms out there inside your organization, I'm not saying overwrite those. Use what is consistent for you. If you don't use anything, feel free to use MET. The idea is this. If you're creating an action plan, it has to involve action that the person can be held accountable to in an amount that you can measure within a time frame that's going to make sense for the resolution of the challenge that you've uncovered. It's just that simple. So whether it's a SMART goal, a MET goal, this is the rep's action, not yours. This is key. We're going to get to what you're going to do in just a minute, but this is what the rep is going to do to resolve the situation. How do you get there? We can go deep on this in another session. Feel free to ping me on LinkedIn or ping me on email if you like to. We could talk about how you manage the actual conversation, but here's the deal. If you are a frontline manager, you understand sales already. And if you understand sales already, you understand how to ask pain questions, how to actively listen. You're going to apply the exact same techniques that you used on prospects, or maybe you still use on prospects with your team. These are things that we do in basic human communication. This is just behavior change, right? It's the same thing as sales. Sales is behavior change. You know how to do these things. This isn't net new. Go back to those same skills and apply them to the conversation. So a conversation can sound like, so Beck, I was listening to your calls, and back when we talked about the difference between features and benefits and pain, what was the reason that we were focusing on pain? Right? Simple questions like this to help someone to arrive at their own conclusion. This is not sit down and talk at someone. That could be considered training. It's not great training, but that's called training. You're not trying to train the rep. Here's the other thing. Make sure that you are having a coaching conversation with your rep on something that you've already trained them to do. You cannot coach someone on something that they haven't been trained to do. So when you're selecting that challenge, make sure that you've had some sort of a training or some sort of resources provided that they've understood clearly and demonstrated that understanding to you before you start trying to coach them on the utilization thereof, right? That's an important piece. All right, so coming through this, you do a questioning process to help co-create an action plan. Right? Let's say out of this conversation, my handshake, these disembodied arms look very strange. But at any rate, the handshake agreement that we had coming out of this conversation is Becca's going to go back and she's going to review pain questions. That's great. I wanted that to happen anyway. She suggested that she role play with Ken. Hey, Ken is very good at asking pain questions, and that's better than Hilmon asking pain questions. I endorse that. Yes, go ask them with Ken. I want you to do it, though, on Zoom, so I can listen to those recordings later just to validate that training is exactly where I want it to be aligned, right? Then she decided, hey, I'm going to apply 3 of these pain questions to each call. I suggested, let's use the same 3. If we're talking to this specific persona, let's just drill down on that so you get muscle memory. This thing becomes habit, and suddenly this stuff is locked into your workflow and fully integrated, right? I asked her to send recordings to me of those conversations so I can review them later, but I want her to identify where in the conversation the pain questions were asked. So what does this force her to do? Now she's got to listen to her calls. She's going to give me very exact timestamps as to where this is happening inside of her calls, so I don't have to go back and sift through whatever call recording software I'm using to do this across 12 reps every weekend. No, she's going to serve this up. She's going to tell me exactly where to look. I'm going to listen, and we're going to talk about this thing the next week. That's my goal. This is what she came up with, which is far better than what I thought of. All right, I'm not done yet. Important piece here, folks. Gotta articulate the consequences. And I know consequences sounds a little bit draconian. It sounds like, okay, you either do this or you're out of the org. That could be the case sometimes, probably not most often in most coaching conversations. Look at the consequences as being the result of either doing or not doing the action plan that was just articulated. So the result of not doing the action plan is probably not a good thing. It may not necessarily correlate to a bad thing, but it's probably not a good thing. What I mean by that is sometimes in coaching, you're trying to move somebody through an organization and do what I was unable to do in my first role, which is help them on a promotion path, help them progressively get better in professional development, right? That's not terrible if they're not able to follow the action plan, right? It's not consequential to their job. It just keeps them from getting where they want to go. Conversely, it could be like, look, hey, this is the second quarter in a row that you haven't been able to throw up the numbers. This might not be the right role for you, right? So you've got to be able to articulate these things ahead of time. You want to get ahead of any kind of a difficult conversation by saying, hey, so, if you're unable to meet this action plan, we're not looking at the result. We're just looking at the action plan. You got to hold people accountable to what they can do, not the results that necessarily come out of it. I don't know whether or not people are going to be picking up the phone. I don't know if it's a vacation. I don't know if something's going to happen with the Queen of England. Who knows, right? So we're not going to hold them accountable to that. We're going to hold them accountable to the action plan that they co-created with us, right? So get ahead of the difficult conversation. Tie these outcomes, tie these consequences to the company's goals, which have probably been clearly articulated either through leadership and through yourself, and tie them to personal goals. So in this conversation with Becca, here's what we decided. She won't, if she does not execute the action plan, she clearly will not hit her number. What does that subsequently mean? It means she won't hit her bonus. What else does that mean? Well, I know she'd really love to go to Dubrovnik over the holidays this winter, and she's probably not going to have enough money to be able to do that, right? The bigger thing here is she wants to get out of the world of being an SDR. She wants to be a really strong AE, move up the path towards management, and that's not likely to happen if she's stuck here in this role and is unable to convert these conversations as effectively as some of her peers, right? So we're going to talk about this together so we clearly understand what's at stake. This makes it a little more grave. It also creates a clear correlation between her personal goals and the goals of the organization. Too often, folks kind of feel like a cog in the works, right? It's like, oh, I got to make all these calls. Yeah, Hilmon just had me in the office. You know, I got to make more calls. I got to do this thing. I got to ask these pain questions. And it's a tough gig, right? It's a really tough gig. If I don't have clarity around why I'm showing up every day to sit in this seat and make these calls or do whatever the task is that needs to be done, then it's probably going to fall to the wayside pretty quickly, right? So we want to make sure we're locked in on that and that we have clarity and understanding about that. Last piece here, we're going to hold each other accountable. This is where you clearly demonstrate your involvement. First off, we want to have clarity on progress. And when I talk about progress, I'm not talking about leaps and bounds. We're not going to revisit this thing in 2 months. We're going to revisit this thing on a daily or maybe couple times a week basis where we understand progress. I'm a huge fan of marginal gains, right? What can we do 1% better each day that in aggregate is going to give us this huge impact, both individually and as an organization? Narrow it down, narrow the aperture, narrow the focus. Here's the other reason. You want to be able to celebrate wins, right? I want to hear these calls at the end of every day or maybe at the end of every 2 days so I can go back and go, thank you for sending me those 2 calls. Listen to the timestamps that you put there. Textbook. That was great. Doesn't matter that the person you were talking to didn't have the pain. You're doing the thing, right? You're doing the thing. What does that do? That encourages more of the same, right? Reward the things you want to see more of. The only way you can do that is if you have clarity on that feedback loop, right? Whatever those check-ins are going to be. And here's the other thing, managers. I know our calendars get filled. There's so many things that we have to accomplish in any given day. And it is very easy to look at your calendar and go, yeah, okay, that follow-up meeting with Becca, I think I'm just gonna send her a note and see if we can push that to next week. Resist the temptation. It will come back and bite you in the behind. Not only is it poor management, not only does it just ruin your own rapport. Yeah, rapport is a thing that we actually have with our team as well as having with our prospects, right? Not only does it ruin rapport, it ruins consistency. You know what I mean? People are going to do what you inspect, right? Expect what you inspect. So be committed, be consistent. That's the word I'm looking for there, with your relationship with your reps, and they will be consistent with you. All right. Feedback loop, essential, however you want to do it. We have myriad ways to contact each other these days. I don't think we're lacking in any way of how we can engage with our reps, either asynchronously or online in mass or individually, however you want to do that. And then articulate your support, right? It's, I'm in this with you. How can I help to move this along? Here's what I'm going to do. They may know the answer to that question, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be available. I commit to reviewing this number of calls. I commit to role playing with you. I commit to whatever it might be. And you uphold your part of the bargain. Together, we're going to make this happen. That's the stuff that creates really strong glue, really strong fabric, really strong esprit de corps on your whole team, and a culture of success and a culture of progression. So what are the things that we've decided to do with Becca? We're going to review pain questions via email. She's going to go back, dig those things out from training, shoot them over to me so I can validate that she's got the right ones. Can't tell you how many times I've sent somebody a rep off to do something. They've gotten busy with it. I come back a week later. I'm like, what is this? This is the old messaging. We just had a product release last week. We're talking about this other thing. Oh, didn't see it in Google Drive, right? Role play with me on Zoom. We're going to do a little bit of that, but we also decided Ken is the man. She's going to do it with Ken. Role playing with a teammate on Zoom. They're going to send me the recording so I can validate that that's exactly what I wanted to see. She's going to send me examples in the wild. What I mean is just whether it's call recordings, whether it's Zoom recordings, whether it's, hey, I just pressed record on my phone and I want to send you what my side of the conversation sounded like, whatever. Get that thing done, right? And then I will provide feedback. That's the goal. Now, how long would this entire coaching conversation have taken? Probably about 15 minutes. The hard work, as you've probably figured out, is in the C, the challenge, and the O, the outcome. You also probably see where I'm going with this acronym, right? The acronym stands for coach, so it's easy to remember. The C is identifying the challenge. The O is outlining the path to success. The A is making sure you are collaborating and co-creating an action plan. The C is ensuring that you've articulated the consequences, and the H is how you're going to hold one another accountable. If you've been listening and taking notes, hopefully you've got a plan right now for at least one of your reps where you can go manage this conversation. What I encourage you to do is do this with all of your reps. The beauty of this framework, when you begin to roll this out to your team, when you begin to manage these conversations in this way, the team starts to get hip to what you're doing, and that's a very good thing. Because you know what? It makes your coaching conversations tighter. The conversation that I'm going to have with Becca the week after this one is going to be even tighter because it's a feedback loop conversation. It's, did you do what you said you were going to do? But I already know that because I've had a feedback loop every 2 days in review thereof. So now I'm looking at progress and I'm able to evaluate and calibrate what that looks like going forward. So this is yours. Go use it. Enjoy it. Love to hear your feedback. Again, I'm Hilmon Sorey. I am the co-founder of CoachCRM. We are trying to impact coaching, driving performance for frontline managers and sales leadership. If you're interested in taking a test drive of CoachCRM, go to our website, www.coachcrm.com. I wish you tremendous success. Take care. Thanks again. 10bound.